everyone. My name is Megan, and I work on the marketing team here at PC NAMETAG. And today I'm here with Jacob Kelley. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. So I would love to learn a little bit more about who you are and what you do with your organization.
Absolutely. So I run an organization called Kelley Queer Education, a consultant and training organization that specializes in diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, that centers or surrounds LGBTQI plus inclusion, also with the preference of being a queer inclusive sex educator. And so my organization is trained and structured in a way where I help other institutions or businesses help develop strategic models or planning, or I come in and provide education or training or workshops that help elevate either their businesses or elevate their leadership, or let staff just have a general understanding around whatever topics they are looking for, which looks like LGBT competency, human competency, communication styles, leadership models, organizational structural changes, and the list can go on. So essentially, I created an organization that allows people to answer that question of, well, how do we learn this information?
Great. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about how you can help event professionals specifically within your company.
Yeah, so helping event planners and specialists are great because I actually am an event planner myself in a different area, more of entertainment value. However, I've also done, my background has been within creating, summits and conferences and other social related events that organizations might go through. And my organization has helped them on many different levels. One, if I've been hired as a speaker, presenter, and MC. So on that aspect, my organization is able to help. On the other aspect, though, I have been a person that helps create evaluation feedback forms, and also the goals and structures of going into an event. So like what that pre-planning might look like. So then when an organization is like, we're at the pre-planning, let's bring in an expert to see if we know what we're doing. And then during and after, they're able to do all the work themselves because the pre-planning has allowed them to look at all those metrics and objectives.
Great. One thing that I learned from you recently is that there's so many different elements of DE&I. I think it's kind of hard for event planners to kind of wrap their minds around it and make sure that they think about all the different things and do them correctly. So that kind of leads me to my next question that I have for you. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit today about how to set goals and track your progress around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I thought it might be fun today if we went through each of the different letters in DE&I, and we could kind of talk about different examples of each and maybe how you can track your progress towards all of those different things. So I thought maybe we could start with D, which is diversity. Could you give me a few examples of what encompasses diversity?
Yeah, so overall, the encompass of diversity, especially if we're looking at event planners, is the backgrounds and identities people are, or the individuals they are, which encompasses then how we look at different lenses of who we're bringing in or what we're speaking to. And so three main areas, right? We think of events, we think of our speakers and panelists, right? We have a diverse understanding of who we're bringing in. We also have our attendee demographics or audience. We have to think about their diversity and who's coming into attending. And then we have our content and topic. So what the intention of our event, reaching format for our audience, and the content that is structurally diverse, or is it one noted? And when we look at measurements in an area of like diversity, we can look at demographic data collection. So that is just people coming in, they're registering, they're sort of looking at like who's attending this, all based off of age, race, geographic location, gender, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. So that's just the richness of the data. We're also looking at representation metrics, which we can use the same, except that might go towards our speakers and people who are going to come in and speak or give presentation or host. Who do they look like, and using the same metrics to bring in. And then lastly, we can look at post event surveys and look at who attended and what specific sessions did people attend? Because we might find out there was a session that had the highest rate of, let's say, LGBT people attending that session based off of who attended and what they went to. And then we could actually see, based off an audience and an event, which demographic is going to which session. And then that's when we look at saying, we did cater to this demographic related to these sessions. And we can also then go into a further post evaluation on demographics and diversity, which then leads us into like equity and inclusion.
Very cool. I love that you brought up understanding who your audience is, because you really want to make sure that the event content that you're offering is reflecting who is in your audience. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And that brings us to the second letter within DE&I is E, that stands for equity. Could you give us a few examples of what equity is and how you can kind of track that?
Yeah. So in this element, accessibility would probably be one of the areas of equity that needs to be thought about in event planning. And that is just looking at the environment, the space, and going into different needs that are there, like dietary needs. Then we have affordable and pricing. So what tiered system do we use to who's getting paid, who's not getting paid? Do you have to pay your staff and organization, or is this a voluntary-led organization or an event? So then therefore, how are we paying also our speakers that we're bringing in? Are we bringing in speakers that we can afford, and looking at pay rate and pay gaps? And then inclusive type practices, which go to then more towards back to the accessibility, but that could also look at like, do we have gender neutral restrooms? Do we have signs up that are in different languages for people to read or see? And when we look at metrics around that, we look at accessibility audit. So that's doing an audit of the entire area of, the venue, the platform. Does it have the proper ramps? Do we have, interpreters if people need interpreters? Is our tech system set up so in a way that is accessible for people who are hearing and non-hearing, or seeing, or maybe sight impaired? Then we have our financial accessibility metrics. So that's our tiered system of how we can measure how we are being equitable to how we're providing the same amount of price or funds to other people. And then the last one I would say would be our outreach sort of type program, where we are able to then create a sense of, are we providing an outreach program that allows us to reach many different organizations that are able to have access to being a presenter or being to a speaker in those areas. And then we can actually create a list of saying, we have 5 of these organizations that specialize in people of color, these ones for LGBT, these ones for disability, and these ones of different ages. And we reached out to them, and this is how we reached out to them.
Mm-hmm. I think in event planning, at least in my experience, it seems like event planners do the D and the E really well within DE&I, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement within I, which is inclusion. So could you tell me a little bit more about how we can make attendees feel safe and welcome and included at events?
Yeah, so one of the areas, and this is actually where I do a lot of my trainings at, is the psychological safety. And for those who might not know what psychological safety, it's creating an environment where all attendees feel safe and encouraged to participate, to engage. And inclusion is about that engagement factor. We also have, like, when we think about inclusive network opportunities, like, do we provide opportunities for people to interact with each other at different levels, which can feel inclusive? So that's in person or virtual. How can we get in? Do we have a forum maybe that's before, during, and after that people can stay connected? And then that cultural sensitivity piece. Are we keeping in mind the humanity and cultural competency that is putting up into effect when we are even selecting dates, right? Are we selecting a date that affects anyone's religious holidays or backgrounds? Are we picking a date that corresponds with a specific month? Like, why and what are we doing? And that kind of goes back into thinking about that diversity piece. But the reason why it comes to the inclusion piece is because sometimes people just randomly pick a date, and you're like, well, did you know that on this date there's a specific religious holiday, so these people might not attend because of it? And the measurements around that are all on surveys. We have to get that feedback, which could be informal or formal feedback during the event. Do we set up a time that says, let's all talk about these type of things, but having an option menu to what we're going to be talking about and the structures we're going to be talking about. And then when I think of like an engagement measurement or metric, so like how engaging was the conference or the event that you might be at, And you can measure that by simply saying, did you feel the need to participate? If you participated, what made it easy for you or fun for you or safe for you or welcoming for you to do that? And then in reverse, like you didn't participate, how come? What was some of the barriers that we didn't notice or recognize?
Mm-hmm. You gave us so many great examples of DE&I, which is awesome. And I think when we think about DE&I, there's so many different things to think about, but it's really something that we have to do. So it really just comes down to making sure that you have that DE&I plan in place and making sure that you're thinking about it strategically. And that brings me to my last question for you today, Jacob. Could you tell me a little bit more about it's really important that event planners are, accomplishing those DE&I goals, but is there a way that we can make sure that we're doing those initiatives without coming off as ingenuine or making it feel kind of forced? I know it can be a little bit tricky within the DE&I space. Could you give us some advice or some tips?
So I think the first advice I have is having a training to understand the core values of human competency around it, because sometimes when we are uncertain of something, we react out of fear and not out of curiosity. And so that's where we get those hesitant conversations, or we see people who might be trying their best, but it comes out forced, which is being like, all right, make sure you tell everyone hello, and then walking up to somebody and going, are you having a good time? And it gets that awkward moment because it desensitizes the normality we have in diversity, and it feels forced. So trainings really help how to engage, the right trainings, not all trainings. I know for me, I teach people how to communicate in different ways and effective that helps us normalize those experiences. So when we see someone that's different from us, we're being more affirming and empathetic rather than judgmental and relying on our implicit biases. But if we step forward after that training, those actions we're supposed to do, I would say some areas to think about would be on all of those pieces I mentioned around, equity and making sure like these are just things that are put in process. Like we have signs that are up there. We have, gender neutral restrooms up there. We have interpreters in case someone is either. There is tech there that allows all people to engage in different ways. And it doesn't feel forced because it's already part of the system. I would also encourage for everyone not to rely on one person to do all the DEI work. DEI work should be a team effort. It shouldn't be just held on to one person that says, you need to be doing this because I said it is. That means we're actually getting away from DEI when we allow one person to dictate or manage everything, when instead they should be like, okay, marketing team, you're in charge of doing all the flyers and promotional event. We already went through the training. I'll review and edit anything you need, but I trust in your best interest. You know what you're doing to bring in the audiences, to bring in the speakers that we need.
Great. Thank you so much for teaching us today. I learned so much from you. And if you have any questions about what we covered today, Jacob is a really great resource, and I would highly recommend checking out their website. And you can even schedule an intro call with Jacob. So if you have any questions, they're here to help you out. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to meet with me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Of course. Thank you so much. You as well.